Yeah, you're done. You're not allowed to make comments.
I put it
No, I'm going to put it right in front of you.
right there. But anyway, and I don't know who the third person is, man.
Either one, we'll have 7.
He just like Buster, they usually hear campaigning. The other day, he was giving that budget meeting.
I was going to say, Mary, you giving a big piece of that you were just told you were going to get.
I'm afraid he may go out.
Oh, you're up this year? Oh, okay. That's 4 years already.
Yeah,
I don't know. He's going to be too handsome.
You got to tell the truth.
That's 2 weeks. 2 weeks out, we got to watch what you say. Somebody dig it running.
Yeah. How long were you in the Senate? Was you in the 16 years there? I remember when I first started coming down, you were 9 years.
But both of those people
miss it.
You miss it?
Yeah, but don't miss the process.
Yeah, yeah.
Takes 2 hours, 30 miles.
Well, you still had your insurance company, you still had that, but now do you?
I sold it.
Yeah, I was going to say, being mayor of the county,
He's 50 years old, and I'm paid him some. My dad passed, my mother passed. It's kind of time to move on.
Yeah. Yeah, now, do you have anybody opposing you in this race?
Oh, yeah, we got 3 more, and then pass this one, and 3 more in general.
Oh, they have primary.
You down there campaigning?
What are you guys doing that?
I give it to you.
Well, it's a big county. It's why you get so many people interested, you know, and it's growing so fast. You got the opposition that's tonight.
Yeah, I think we're probably 22,000 shy. I think somewhere has to make it based on that. I think we're open on this.
Okay. Yeah, that's true.
Did you enjoy it?
We got south of the interstate before the black school sometime. That's over there. So we all know the city. Where we build services over there, we got a building in half of that department safety.
We pretty well know except for folks wanting here now for full term, then you get to the end. It's still always, can't take anything for granted, you know. And do you have the other ones that are running in the primary against you? Are they running the legislature? Or are they going Yeah, I think you ran for Sumner County.
I didn't see us in there.
We're not going to put Diane.
Real close.
Diane, yeah.
He had on
there.
I just seen his eye. He told me, you know who I am? I sure do. With the
Trying to find a job.
He's real cold.
Can't make enough. He puts down on his resume.
Leaving or? His son actually come over.
Really? Yeah.
He was right there. Yeah. Law school, so they didn't help.
Yeah, I don't have to worry about any races, you know that. I just have to worry about who they're going to put in charge. Yeah, exactly.
In a better mood.
I think Kenny and I are the only two in the whole state that came from a law enforcement background. He's been manager, one of the police chief. Kenny Martin, modular. Yeah. But we're the only two. We spoke on title city manager concept.
At least you can get Anthony to sit down.
Yeah, definitely going to do it. I thought it was a great training ground because they deal with the media, swing, personnel issues, budgeting issues. They gave us a good background to prepare with it.
Scope. You had a little, just bring it back.
Station name for the record. Also, if you need to leave, I'll do the phone to you you have mine. Okay, first thing we do is welcome everybody. If we can speak to the internet, we want to welcome them to online. First thing we got to do is some housekeeping, look at the minutes, January 19th meeting. Well, I'll take a motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So moved. Okay, let's move on to our February 16th meeting.
I need a motion? Oh, man. I need a motion. I got a motion over here in the corner. Thank you. Need a second? Got a second by Mayor Holt. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Thank you. Anybody want this phone call? Okay, we'll move on to our March 2nd minutes. I need a motion for approval.
So moved. Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? So moved. Thank you. At this time, we'll move to the public comments. Is there anyone here from the public that wishes to address the Transportation Policy Board? You got anybody on the internet that wants to say anything, John? I think we're good, okay. All right, we'll move on then to our action items. I'd like to introduce Anna. She's going to talk about the Principal Transportation Planner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have the third cycle of amendments for fiscal year 2022 to present to you today. Only 2 amendments to go over with you this morning, so a much lighter slate than what we've become accustomed to seeing. Moving into the first one of those, we have a request from the City of Portland for their Portland Pedestrian Connector project. They are revising the scope of this project just to modify some of the sidewalk segments that they're pursuing as they look to move towards implementing the project. They're also doing some minor revisions to the project funding. And after some conversations with the city yesterday, there's actually a slight difference between how that will end up looking versus what is shown in your packet. But essentially splitting work phases out to where NEPA, design, right-of-way, and construction are all separated. The overall project cost is not changing, just modifying some of the funds in between those phases. Following that, we have a request from the town of Smyrna for their Smyrna ITS phases 3, 4, and 5. They are adding funds to this project, both CMAQ funds that they received from TDOT, as well as adding some local funds. And that is all we have today as far as amendments go. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to take those.
Any questions for Anna? Hearing none, we're going to open back up to the public to see if there's any questions from the public or comments on this action. Hearing none, then I'll ask for a motion to approve this TIP amendment.
So moved.
Got a motion by Mayor Callis. Got a second by Mayor Holt. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none. That amendment passes. Thank you, Anna. Okay, we'll move to election of Transportation Policy Board officers. I'm going to turn this over to Mayor Reed, Chairman of the Nominating Committee.
Good morning. The nominating committee would like to nominate Mayor Billy Vogel for chair and Mayor Chaz Mulder for vice chair for the Transportation Policy Board for the 2022 calendar year. And I also want to thank our nominating committee, who was Paige Brown and Randall Hutto and myself. So thank you guys for your help with this.
Okay, I'll open it up to the board. Any nominations from the board? Hearing none, Mayor Reed, did y'all take considerable thought and action on this?
Very much so. We thought you have done an outstanding job.
Pull that knife out of my back. Okay, you've heard the nominations. I'll take a motion. Got a motion, need a second? Got a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? So moved. Thank you, Mayor Reed and the nominating committee. We'll keep the train on the track. All right, we'll move down to item 4, informational items. And this again, I'm going to ask Mayor Reed to give us an update from the task force.
Well, we are really excited to bring you guys an update of what's been taking place. I want to thank everybody who has served on the task force, and there's quite a few of you sitting around the table today. And is somebody going to run the... You got it? Okay. So with our project delivery task force, we are going to review our task force objectives. We're going to document the progress to date. We're going to highlight some outstanding questions and then look at our immediate next steps. Just to kind of update you and remind you, our task force objectives were to identify obstacles to the obligation of our federal funding, and to work with TDOT to find solutions to moving these projects forward. And I want you to know that I really feel like the task force has allowed us to share common issues and challenges in project development process, and we really feel like we're going to be able to recommend and implement strategies that are going to deliver these projects on time and hopefully come up with some solutions. Our task force project progress to date. Vanna, thank you. In your packet that you have before you, you will see how it was organized and oriented, the task force roster, and you see who all is serving on the task force. We have mayors, city administrators, public works directors, engineers, transportation directors, public transit, TDOT, and GNRC staff. So we hope to bring a wide range of people that can bring forth many ideas. So far, we've held 5 in-person meetings. We've reviewed programming and obligation history. We've reviewed current practices for programming, project delivery, and interagency coordination. And in your packet behind the roster, you're going to see where we've surveyed members to identify obstacles to obligation. Some of these major challenges are complex review approvals and utility relocation. The moderate challenges we've identified are staffing challenges and insufficient funding. And the minor or occasional challenges are conflicting expectations on design, and I'm sure none of you all have this, but sometimes in the town of Smyrna we have lack of public buy-in. We're also going to talk a little bit about identified areas of opportunity for potential solutions, and Sean's going to talk about that in just a second. And then we're also going to talk about identified outstanding questions to address, and that's kind of where we're at in the process currently. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Sean to talk about the initial identification of areas of opportunity. So Sean, you're on.
Thank you, Mayor Reed. So I think through the discussions over those first 5 meetings, obviously we've grappled with a lot of those common challenges, but I think it's led to some potential areas of opportunity to pursue and potentially leading to some recommended actions. I think the buckets that those areas of opportunity fall under is information exchange, so better sharing information on project details and updates as they continue to move through the process. With training and education, really increasing kind of the awareness of the different requirements of not only the TDOT development process, but also the TIP and the programming policies, that process and those expectations of project proponents. In terms of policies and programming, looking at kind of optimizing some of those existing programming policies that we have to better position projects in moving through and getting obligated for construction. And then workflow and process, really looking at increasing the predictability and kind of the time frames of those review and approvals, and as well as looking at each project and from its scale and, kind of the efficiency of if all of the boxes don't need to be checked for a particular project, then maybe there are varying pathways for a project to make it through project development. So just we'll touch on a couple of specific examples. So for information exchange, we have currently a couple of tools, including the TIP Interactive Database, as well as we've been sharing the quarterly project update spreadsheets with you. Those are kind of static documents. And so one thing that we've done recently is, staff recently developed a TIP project tracker that we developed in-house to help facilitate that information exchange and allow project proponents and TDOT and staff to be looking at the same information on a project's status, cost, time frame for implementation. And then we've also shared that information in addition to getting updates from our locals through that application. We've also shared it with TDOT to help support and with the goal of having them be able to review and incorporate any notes or updates that they have on projects within that application. Another, moving on to the policies and programs, I think, in trying to better optimize our programming policies, a couple of ideas that have been considered is opportunities to better position projects through requiring minimum planning thresholds for projects that have not yet been programmed on the TIP, as well as better enforcement of existing programming policies, to working with the state to swap some of the suballocated funds with state funds to help projects get through the process. And we'll touch a little bit on that with under the staff report on some potential funds that are subject to lapse by the end of the fiscal year. And then also just focusing on the type of projects we're doing or the phases of work that we're funding, whether that be just funding construction only of a project or focusing on more higher cost projects than a number of smaller cost projects. Getting into the training and education, just raising awareness. I think one new opportunity to consider would be for staff to really formalize the TIP training that we provide. I know we have a lot of correspondence with our local members, but potentially creating a curriculum where go through a training process and certify contacts within each community that are going to be the point of contact on TIP projects. And then lastly, for the workflow and process, really the focus of improving predictability and efficiency, and that's with the goal of better understanding what the scheduling or time frame of a project as it moves through the process is going to be. And that, helps, staff not only with programming, but also helps locals who are managing that project to set expectations locally as well. And then also looking at streamlining the processes for some of the smaller scale projects. I think that gets at, if there's unnecessary steps that we can avoid, flagging that on the front end so that a project can have an easier pathway through the development process. So those are just some of the areas that we've identified, and obviously I think before those are goals to lead to recommended action, but there's still some outstanding questions that we'll need to grapple with and address that I'll turn it back to Mayor Reed to talk about in a little bit more detail.
And I guess we've gotten to the point with our meetings that we just didn't want to keep throwing ideas out and things like that. We wanted to make sure that we were starting to move forward, and so we came up with our outstanding questions, and these are also in your packet. And what some of these I'm going to go over in detail, and please, anybody that's on the committee that wants to give a specific example, feel free to do that. But one thing we talk about quite a bit is that one size doesn't fit all. And what we mean by that is that not all the steps in the project development process are applicable to every project. And is it possible for TDOT to create custom checklists for a project type with anticipated timeframes? And we've asked that, can there be an opportunity for the project proponents to meet with TDOT local programs at the beginning of the process to identify steps that apply and ones that don't apply? And so that's what we mean by the one size doesn't fit all. And in regards to information sharing, what we consistently heard was through the development process, project submissions, reviews, and approvals of general shared are usually shared through PDFs or email. And given that the project development process involves coordination across many divisions with TDOT and with external stakeholders, it's critical that everybody has access to accurate and complete project information. And so we asked if there was a way to explore new software in the process, transition to an online system so that you could see a dashboard to know exactly where your project is in the process and how much longer is it going to be there. And could people in your community also see that as well, so that we're all working from the same page. Communication of changes and their impacts. TDOT recently made some changes to its procedures for the review and approval by the environmental division at each phase of the project development. So the project proponents found out about these changes through the submission of their projects for review and have concerns that these changes may further delay some of the project delivery. And so one of the things we've asked is, can TDOT provide an overview of the changes, explain the rationale behind these changes, and what impact they're likely to have to project delivery? So just one of those communication things that we think that will benefit all of us. Conflicting comments, and you will see in your package, you can read through and see the specifics we're talking about with the conflicting comments. Empowering TDOT local programs, equal priority for locally led projects, state requirements versus federal requirements, and TDOT as a guide through the process. So anything to those outstanding questions that task force members want to add to? Before we move on to our immediate next steps, I want you all to understand what a great job this task force has done at leaving their feelings at the door. They've done a really good job of being very open to coming forward with problems or obstacles or opportunities, and everybody's trying to work together. So I hope that this is going to benefit all of our communities as we move forward. Let's talk a little bit about the immediate next steps. We are going to be reviewing and commenting on the stewardship agreement between TDOT and federal partners. We'd like to invite TDOT Local Programs and Environmental Division to discuss their perspective on issues and challenges with us at the task force. We'd like to assess each of the identified areas of opportunity and potential solutions and begin drafting recommendations to include roles, responsibilities, timelines, and resources. The last thing I want to say is to each one of us as local jurisdictions. We are asking TDOT to step up and help us through the process, but we all have to look internally as well. And what I mean by that is we have to remember that the TIP funds should only be programmed on projects that are ready to get started. If a project sits in the TIP forever, there's another project that's out there that's in somebody else's jurisdiction that is ready to go. So if you're not ready to move forward with your project, please consider that when you're asking for it to be put into the TIP. I think that will help us get these funds obligated quicker, which is something I think everybody at this board wants to do. So again, we'll continue to update you on this process. We are going to be sending a letter to Mayor Vogel as well as to TDOT, kind of explaining everything that we've had in the packet. That's what we kind of talked about at our last meeting was we're ready to move forward. We're ready to see some of these things implemented or at least begin to talk to TDOT about can this be implemented. So that's our next step. And when we should have that letter in the hopefully for the next week ready to go, and we'll get that sent to you all as well as to TDOT. So anything for us?
Anybody have any questions for Mayor Reed and task force? How about Sean? Any questions for Sean?
Here, Jonathan.
Oh, there we go. Now I'm on. I think one of the things to keep in mind, and at least I think we're on consistent terms, and I think everybody agrees with this on the task force, and Mayor Reed can certainly jump in if I'm going down the wrong route here, but I think everyone would agree with me and say that one of the things we've made very clear is we want to make sure that we're this is a continuing and ongoing thing. It's not a one-time, hey, we're going to look at it this one time, we're going to try to improve some things and close the book, put it on a shelf, and hey, we did it that one time. We want this to be a continuing partnership, that we're always looking at ways to improve and make the process more efficient when new rules and regulations come down the pike. We want this to be a continuing, living, breathing partnership where we're looking to do things the best way possible, the most efficient way possible. You know, we don't want this to be a finger pointing, TDOT did this, the locals can't spend the money right, they can't do projects right, so we had to create more rules to figure this out. We want this to be, where we're an example of how we should be doing the process. So that's really the goal of this and how we want to do this. So, and again, we're ready to start putting stuff on paper to where we're really getting the rubber meets the road here to where we're going to be delivered projects. That's what the goal is here. I know I'm excited about that. I think the rest of the task force is excited. One of the things I was very hopeful to hear is a lot of the ideas and a lot of the frustrations we're all feeling from every organization. We're kind of the same frustrations we're feeling. So even the different stories that were coming out in the different meetings we're kind of the same things, just from different aspects and different opinions and different viewpoints. So that's what I'll add to it and say. But the big thing was we just want to make it a continuing partnership.
Thank you, John. Anybody got any questions?
I think we'll write a question. I want to stir things up, but I know that
Everybody here, Mayor Hope?
we've got projects that's been in TIP for a long time,
And we need to prioritize trying to move those projects forward because, I don't know, some of them may have been in there almost 20 years. And that's been kind of the heartburn, I think, over comments over the past, concerns.
Was that addressed at all? Did we talk about trying to help those entities move those projects forward in a very timely manner? And, you know, at a certain period of time, probably, unless there's mitigating circumstances, we need to try to make sure that those monies become available for projects that are, as they would say, shovel-ready, whatever that means. And I think that's probably the elephant in the room that we talk around a lot of times because it's painful, and we don't want to see anybody lose their project. But yet, at the same time, if it's not going to come to fruition, we need to make sure that we take some action. So I guess that's kind of a complicated question, but I think that, Mayor Reed, it needs to eventually be addressed. Can we give this back to you?
I'm fine. That was exactly what I was talking about, that we as locals, but we as this board are going to have to make some hard decisions, and we have not specifically looked at those individual ones. I think that is something that in our task force that we are going to be moving towards doing, and I hope that that's a reason that the task force will continue so that we can bring forth to this board projects that probably don't need to be in the TIP right now, that there are other projects. And that's going to be hard for all of us. That's going to be hard when your project's there, but if you don't have funding, somebody else is missing out on being able to get a project completed.
And I think that's really valid, and one of the reasons I think that's more valid today than ever is because of what we're seeing as far as on the inflation side, of construction, inflation in general, and every day those funds sit there underutilized means that we're pushing out, especially the way we're growing, pushing out projects in the future that almost become unattainable to really get underway and to complete.
And I've not talked to Mayor Vogel about this, but was hoping to, so this is the first time he's going to be hearing this, but I was hopeful that we could come back, whether it's on a quarterly basis at some point, and bring forth some of those projects that aren't moving forward after we've talked to those communities and have open discussion about what we as a board want to do about them. And again, it's not going to be easy.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think you've done an excellent job. I know that's difficult to deal with, but I think if we have an open and honest discussion and we go to the entities where we've got projects that's been in there for a long, long period of time, I don't know what we say, after 10 years or just some point in time, and try to help them move those projects forward. And if they can't, then I think at some point in time it's reasonable to say, you know, we've got to take some action.
I agree.
Anyone else? Thank you, Mayor Hope. Let me just say that I'm impressed with this task force. When this started, the group of people that was put on this are go-getters. I think Mayor Reed asked me about a couple of recommendations. I said, well, let me tell you this. If I got to get in the foxhole with somebody, I'd get in the foxhole with this guy. And that's kind of the way the task force is. And I was impressed that they met one day at Smyrna, and then the next meeting, another host would host the meeting, and they moved around. And Mayor Reed, I appreciate your leadership on this. Well, I'm going to tell you, I didn't go to the one, but if they outdone Smyrna, I'm impressed. Yeah. They do, and listen, Smyrna's got a chef. They ain't got a cook; they got a chef. They got a chef doing that, and you know, I was embarrassed to go back to Robbs County and go down to Burger King and get me something, you know. But anyway, hey. Well, thank you, and thank you for your leadership, and thanks for everyone serving on this task force. Anybody, sure you ain't got no questions for Mayor Reed? If not, well, you can answer them. All right, I'm going to move on to the update on the TIP development, and I'm going to turn it over to Sean.
Thank you, Chair. So continue our discussion on projects and investments that we're going to make over the near term. So I know it seems like we've probably been talking about the TIP development cycle at every meeting, but today we wanted to focus. We've been collecting a lot of funding requests from local agencies, and today we want to focus a little bit more on the available funding side, the revenue side of what that financial picture looks like, of funds that are coming to the state from the federal government, and then kind of how that trickles down to our region and the funding levels that we can expect over the next 4 years. So just to start us off, kind of zooming out to how all of this money comes in from the federal level. Obviously, we pay user fees in the gas tax, as well as general transfer funds at the federal level come into the Highway Trust Fund and then get allocated through formula-based programs and also through discretionary programs down to states and local governments. And for the formula-based programs, those go to TDOT, and at the state level, there's a portion of it that gets that's mandatory that it get allocated to areas across the state, and we'll show a map of that in a second. And then there's also a significant portion of that funding that can be used anywhere in the state. And so as we go through the project development process, we identify those projects through the sub-allocated funds that the MPO prioritizes, as well as projects that TDOT identifies within our region to be programmed in the TIP. So just to give you a sense of, on the next slide, where that mandatory sub-allocation goes is to urbanized areas of 200,000 or more in that dark blue. Those are kind of the four main MPOs that you'll see, and then urbanized areas of 500,000 to 200,000 identified in blue, and also the urban clusters under 50,000. And then when you go to the next slide and see how that plays out within our region, you'll see when we talk about the Nashville-Davidson urbanized area, that we're talking about the dark blue. When we talk about the Murfreesboro UVA, we're talking about the light blue area, and then for the urban clusters scattered throughout the region, identified in orange. And so as we go to the next slide, we're typically statewide, the total pot of funding has been about $800 to $900 million a year, dating back to 2010. With the recent passing of the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, we've seen an increase, a bump up in funding starting in 2022. And then as you look out over the next, the life of the TIP, 2023 through 2026, we're looking at approximately close to $5 billion statewide in federal funds for the highway program. And then kind of looking at how that plays out in terms of that statewide money, how much do we expect to go towards projects and programs within our region? About a quarter of that, so about $1.1 billion would be looking to be programmed within our TIP. And then kind of the distribution of that mandatory sub-allocation that we talked about going to those specific areas versus that funding that is available for money anywhere. We would anticipate about close to $1 billion of that funding across statewide coming to our region, in addition to that sub-allocated amount. And you'll see that mandatory sub-allocated amount is a smaller share of what's coming into our region, and so it's important to not only be concerned with the funding that we're allocating through sub-allocated, or the projects and programs that we're deciding on through the sub-allocated amount, but also those priorities that TDOT is advancing within our region. And then kind of looking at that broken out over that 4 fiscal years, looking at about $200 to $260 million in funding from statewide pots over the 4-year horizon, and then the sub-allocated portion increasing from about 30 to 32 million to 35 million out to 2026. And so, in addition to that funding that we're going to be getting that's new over 2013, 14, 15, or 2023, 24, 25, and 26, we also have a significant share of carryover funding, funding that we have received in previous fiscal years, but we have not obligated or spent that funding. And so that is a significant share, close to 200 million in carryover funding to supplement that new funding that we're going to get. And so when we look at that kind of in total on the next slide, we have our 194 million in carryover funding across these various funding sources, plus the 126 million that we are going to get over the next 4 fiscal years, for a total of 320 million over the life of that TIP. One thing I should mention is the 2 funding sources at the bottom, the carbon reduction program, are new programs through the latest infrastructure bill, and there is still some guidance that needs to be developed before we can program that funding, and so it's not yet available. So once you take that off, we're down to about 308 million available to program from that sub-allocated pot. So that 308 million on the left shows the available funding that we have, and then based on what we've received so far from total funding requests, we have continuing commitments to our active transportation program, as well as our transit and technology program, which are set-asides of the funds that we're going to get. We also have carryover programming projects and programs that are in the existing TIP that have not been completed and will roll over, or that would roll over into the next TIP. And then in addition to that, about 50 million in additional funding requests to the carryover programming. So additional funding requests to projects that are currently programmed within the TIP. So that kind of gives you a quick overview of the financial picture. A significant share of that, the funding requests nearly account for all of the funding available. I think the difference between that would be about 16 million. And so there's kind of some ongoing questions that we need to address as part of this allocating or programming the sub-allocated funds. And so one of those would be the confidence about projects that haven't started. So projects that are in the existing TIP that would carry forward, if they have not yet been started, should, and this is kind of discussions from the task force, should we be requiring prior project planning before that project then gets carried over. And I think this is would help flesh out maybe cost estimates or scopes, and prevent some of the kind of unanticipated challenges that arise when the project is programmed in the TIP prior to prior planning. Also, I think another one, we've typically assumed inflationary growth factors of about 4% a year, and so each year adding that 4% to the year that we're going to obligate that project for construction. Obviously, inflationary pressures have been more significant since we adopted the last regional transportation plan, and that inflationary growth factor needs to be revised or increased, and so how to deal with that in order to program to the year of expenditure. Also, local match commitments, just confirming with our locals that they'll be able to provide sufficient proof of local match on existing projects, as well as if we're able to commit additional funding resources toward the project, the associated match required with that. And then lastly, state participation. The state has a number of programs that they do grant calls for, and so I think there's an opportunity for cost sharing between some of these state funding sources, or also the federal sources that TDOT prioritizes, such as like CMAQ or TAP funds. And so trying to get a better sense of TDOT's commitments over the next 4 years to help identify opportunities for that. Lastly, I think, we've talked a lot about that piece in the orange of the suballocated funds, but I think it's also important to come back to the dark blue blocks, which is, those other priorities that are going to be programs within our region or that are going to move forward. And so I think there's a lot of ongoing questions or remaining questions to resolve on some of that statewide funding and how it's going to be utilized over the next 4 years. Obviously, it's a significant portion of the revenue that's programmed in the TIP, and so looking to TDOT to share information on their priorities with the board so that the board can have an opportunity to weigh in on those projects. In addition to those specific projects, a lot of those being derived from the Improve Act that are moving forward within our region. There's also TDOT groupings for NHPP, STBG, as well as probably missing one there, but that provides another opportunity as well of what are some of the candidates for that funding. And so oftentimes the groupings provide some flexibility for TDOT to make changes or adjust what projects are going to move forward within the region. But I think having the board have an opportunity to see kind of what some of those candidates are that are going to be considered for programming within our region, even though they're part of that larger bucket, I think would be another opportunity for the board to weigh in on some of those upcoming priorities. So I know I've talked through a lot there, but that was kind of the update that we wanted to provide, and happy to take any questions or comments.
Questions or comments for Sean? Thank you, Sean. If not, we'll move on to annual call for planning studies, and again, we're going to bring Sean back.
I guess I was hoping for a minute break to get a sip of water.
And a drink of water?
Thank you.
Hey, I want to say again that the report from the task force was really great. Y'all done a lot of work on that, insight and what it took to plan that. Okay, Sean, you ready now? I'll buy you some time.
Next item we want to transition to is the talking about the Unified Transportation Planning Work Program. And so each year, we have a 2-year Unified Planning Work Program, but each year, regardless of if we're developing a new document, we want to provide an opportunity to have a call for studies, and that's kind of twofold. One, to account for all of the planning activities that are going on within the region, to coordinate local, state, regional efforts, and also to just provide an update as well on some of the activities that staff is engaged in carrying out throughout the region. So just a quick background about how much funding we have in a given year. About $2.83 million total in planning for the region. That's combines both of the or that accounts for our CPG grant, the Consolidated Federal Planning Grant, with our PL and 5303 funds, as well as the SPR, the State Planning Research Grant, that comes to our region. And kind of the breakdown is 80% of that being federal, provide about 4% with a state match, and then local membership dues of the NPO board provide kind of the remaining match on those federal funds. And then, kind of how that then is allocated. A significant portion is allocated to the NPO staffing, about 90% of that, which leaves a portion, but not a large portion, available for regional planning efforts conducted through consulting services. And then, kind of how we typically focus that work is, in-house, a lot of the tip work, modeling, a lot of the research and analysis that you see presented and then contained within our data portal online, obviously our communication outreach work, and then kind of the activities that we prioritize for the consultant work tend to be kind of our regional studies or large corridor studies like South Corridor, for instance. If we go to the next slide, one after that, you can find our current UPWP and some of the recently completed plans and studies on our website at gnrc.org/UPWP. And I will mention, just kind of three of the three priorities that we have committed to through our existing work program and hope to carry out in the near future. The first one being a growth management study, really looking at how to mitigate some of the transportation impacts associated with the growth and development and supporting locals to have the tools necessary to deal with that. Also updating our coordinated human services transportation plan, not only updating our assessment of the needs for low-income, elderly, and disabled residents, but really looking to identify kind of strategies to address some of those needs throughout the region, and coordinating across a number of stakeholders from the transit agencies to local agencies to other nonprofit providers for those populations. And then lastly, regional freight study. I think this would be the third priority, but kind of the next phase of our freight planning work. We've done 3 prior studies over the years, and this one be more focused on identifying kind of those champions to really lead some of those strategies and projects that have been identified over the years, and to help support implementation of those priorities. So I think kind of what we are looking for from Transportation Policy Board, we've kind of already sent out this request to our Transportation Coordinating Committee as well, is looking for updates and priorities from you all. You can submit information about some of the local efforts that you have underway or planned over the next year or so, or identify a concern that you have that could be part of a regional program or study that you would like staff to be focusing on over the coming year. I think both of those would be extremely helpful. I think we went through this last year in a similar way where we provided this survey, and it led to a lot of inputs from the local governments that then led to further, more detailed conversations, over the phone or via Teams to kind of talk through some of these needs that you guys are trying to address, and potential timetable and how those opportunities or those planning activities could be leveraged with other activities that are already ongoing or planned in the near term. So we'll keep that open until May 1st, but please feel free to complete that and provide as much detail as you have. You may know the budget, or you may not know the budget or funding source. It doesn't matter. Just looking for information on those upcoming priorities. And then we have any other slides? And I think the only other slide that we have is just in terms of going through this process, then we can, it'll set us up for an amendment to our Unified Planning Work Program to incorporate a lot of these updates that we receive. So feel free to, or happy to take any questions that the board may have.
Any questions for Sean? Good job, Sean. Seeing none, I guess you did a good job, yeah. Okay, we'll move to our regular reports. I'm going to recognize the other Sean Tanala, with the federal report.
Yeah, ready to mic?
Could we borrow that mic?
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, wait, never mind. You keep that.
All right. Hey, everyone. Sean Santaya, Planning Specialist with the FHWA Tennessee Division. Appreciate you guys having us. A couple of items from the federal perspective. First, locally, a staff update within our office. Ms. Sabrina David, our Deputy Division Administrator, who would normally represent us in the absence of Pam Cordenbrock, has been promoted and is going to be moving to Georgia to be the Division Administrator of our Georgia Division. So we'll have a little bit of a vacancy there, but Pam and I will still be accessible and here to help you guys out however we can. So. Some funding opportunities that are open or coming open. Our multimodal project discretionary grant program is currently open. $2.9 billion available nationwide. This is a consolidated funding opportunity for our infra program, so a sort of freight-specific grant program. Our mega project program, program. This is a new program through the bipartisan infrastructure law that's focused on our large regional, national significant multimodal transportation projects, and then a rural program, another new program through the bipartisan infrastructure law focused on investments in rural areas. So. The notice of funding is out now. I encourage everyone to look at to review that. Go to USDOT's website. We've got a lot of information, FAQs, and other resources on there for anyone that's interested in applying. And the deadline for that is May 23rd, 2022. So we've also got coming open soon is going to be our Safe Streets and Roads for All discretionary program. And that is a program that is actually targeted towards local governments, regional governments. It's a discretionary program to advance safety initiatives. So this is funding that's going to be available to develop safety action plans, to implement safety improvements, and that sort of thing. And state DOTs will not be eligible to apply for that. Sorry, Jonathan. So this should be. We're hoping we can get some competitive applications out of Tennessee and get some of that funding funneled towards Tennessee. I'll just mention this afternoon. So we're hearing sometime in May, but we don't have a specific date. Yeah. Yep. We do have a website that's been published with some preliminary information, and there will be a webinar for sort of a pre-application webinar. Yeah. And then I'll just mention a couple of months ago, I presented to this body on our TMA federal certification review. So this is a federal review of the planning process that's being carried out for the Nashville urbanized area and the surrounding planning area. So we are, as part of that, we really want to get feedback from MPO membership to inform our federal action, to inform the certification of the process. So last week we hosted a listening session with MPO members, so appreciate those of you that were able to participate in that, and then we will have another one this afternoon, virtual sessions. Most everyone should have received an announcement and an invitation, totally voluntary to participate as you're able, but we welcome any feedback on the planning process through those listening sessions. And then the last thing I'll mention, just also want to commend this group and the Project Delivery Task Force on all the work that you guys are doing, especially in the context of this infusion of funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law with so many new discretionary programs. It's really it's great to see you guys setting yourselves up in a position to be able to deliver projects as efficiently and as possible. And looking at those opportunities should really prove beneficial, especially in the case where if we end up with projects with direct federal administration that can sometimes be the result of those discretionary programs. Having that experience and being aware of the federal requirements as administered through TDOT currently will really prove beneficial there. So. We also just commend all the work going on there. So that's all that I got for a federal update.
Okay. Any questions for Sean? Thank you, Sean. We'll move on to our, let me look and see here. I think we're going to move to Jonathan Russell. Okay, Jonathan, for our state report.
That's me. All right, thank you guys very much. As you see on the screen, for the better part of essentially 3 months, we've been talking about our urban transportation planning grant that was due back in December. We had 4 applications from this MPO area. Thankfully, today in my inbox received the signatures from our commissioner. So you will be finding out this week. Hopefully, all of you, actually, it'll all be good news. Everyone in this room is going to have good news. So that's 4 communities in this area. So, and again, this is something that's going to be coming back every year. So it's for planning services in your community up to $200,000. So this will be coming back around very soon. So if you'd like more information on the next round, I'm happy to meet with you and give you more information on that. Also, lastly, part of the last Infrastructure Act, the IIJA, $7.5 billion was set aside for electric vehicle funding. Of that 7.5, $2.5 billion was set aside for a discretionary grant program where communities can apply to have electrical vehicle infrastructure put in their communities, whether along specific corridors or, just in your community in general. And that includes urban and rural areas alike. So TDOT is working right now with TDEC to do informational sessions on that. Actually, the one for Nashville is scheduled for May the 9th. As of right now, I'm not sure if there's a location set or not. But if you are interested in getting electrical vehicle infrastructure for your community, regardless of the size, please pay attention to that. That'll be coming up really soon. I know it has to be, I believe it has to be submitted before the end of the year. But again, May the 9th is the Nashville meeting, and there are 8 scheduled across the state with a hybrid option if you can't attend that one on the 9th of May. So any additional questions, feel free to reach out. But I think that's it for TDOT. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Any questions for Jonathan? Okay, we'll go to the chair's report. I just want to say that I want to thank everyone for having confidence in me sitting here and leading these meetings again. I've learned a whole lot last year, the first term mayor, sitting here and listening to the knowledge in this room. And I appreciate the task force and GNRC especially. I'm going to put another plug in. If you're messing with the TDOT infrastructure money, I'm going to GNRC to help me be a consultant and providing this out. I've got 10 cities, and Mayor Callis will say they're all looking at me right now, aren't they? So I'm going to use GNRC to help me out, and I think you ought to take advantage of these people. But I appreciate everyone being here today. With that, I'll do the staff report.
I'm going to turn it over to Anna real quick, but the only thing I'll mention is all those grant opportunities that were mentioned. I'll put those in a follow-up email so that you can access them in one place, but a lot of opportunities on the horizon.
All right. Just had a quick informational item we wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of. We have 2 funding sources that are available to us that have a sum of funds that are potentially lapsing at the end of this fiscal year. One of those being the Highway Infrastructure Program, which provides funding to address state and local transportation needs through the construction of highways, bridges, and tunnels. And it had a greater flexibility and project eligibility over 4 years of allocations that we received in 2018, 2019, 2020, and then we received a supplemental allocation in 2021 as part of the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act. So this was a non-recurring program. We just got those 4 years of allocations. We don't necessarily expect to receive additional funds from this program. The other being our Transportation Alternatives Program. So this is a portion of funding that we commit to our active transportation program set aside that I think a lot of you are familiar with. It's the same type of funding as the statewide pot of TAP funding, but this is our direct sub-allocation of that fund. As you know, I think it provides funding for on- and off-road pedestrian and bicycle facilities, as well as related safety features, environmental mitigation activities, and education and outreach. And this is a program that does recur on a yearly basis. But those funds do expire every 4 years. Just as a reminder, with the HIP funds, we adopted a resolution in May of 2020 that set those funds aside for projects with immediate needs for additional funding for right-of-way or construction. So we kind of had that additional stipulation attached to that pot of funding. So just a quick breakdown of where we stand dollar-wise with the HIP funds. The $3.44 million that we received in 2018, we were able to place on a project and get those funds allocated, or obligated rather, so that funding is off the table. In 2019, we received $4.85 million, but we've only been able to obligate $1.08 million of that. So the remaining $3.77 million in funds from that 2019 allocation we received is what we stand to lose at the end of this fiscal year if we can't find a place to put it. We did receive some additional amounts, as you can see, in 2020 and 2021 that we'll also need to get obligated by the deadline of September of next year and the following September. For the TAP funds, we have been receiving around $1.33 million a year. We are still trying to receive some clarification of exactly what we might stand to lose at the end of this fiscal year. It would be great news if we ultimately find out that we don't stand to lose any funds at the end of this year, but we're making sure we're clarifying that. Some of the things that we have taken a look at as we have tried to find a quick home for these funds is project readiness. Is the project already in or imminently approaching the right-of-way or construction phase? Obviously, is the project eligible? We're making sure we're clear of any issues there. Going back to how that HIP funding sort of had an advancing project eligibility with each year of allocation, we've had to make sure that that 2019 allocation we received, the project that we choose, doesn't run into any snags in terms of eligibility. Funding need, we want to make sure, it would be ideal that the project we choose needs the full amount of funds that we stand to lose so that we can just go ahead and get that obligation wiped out in one fell swoop. And then staff has assessed the level of risk with different projects that we've examined where we could potentially place these funds to see if there's anything that could stand in the way of obligation. We are still exploring our options for this. We have identified a handful of locally managed projects from your jurisdictions that maybe could use this funding. However, this obligation really needs to occur very soon, as in this summer, most likely. So I think it's likely you'll see us coordinate with TDOT on looking to find a project that maybe they are sponsoring or managing that could use these funds and making a swap with them for funding that might not be expiring so soon. But we'll continue to keep you posted on how this shakes out, but just wanted to make you aware of the exploration that we're doing.
Okay, any comments? Yeah. Go ahead, Mayor.
Would HIP funds for right-of-way be applicable to the same physical access roads that we have on top of the You don't have
So this would need to be a project that we already have programs in the tip and is absolutely ready to go. We're not able to look at new efforts for these funds at this time. Theoretically, future HIP funds that could potentially be eligible, yes.
Anyone else? Was that the staff report, Sean? Okay, thank you. Any more other business to come before the board? If not, I want you to have a safe trip, and I'll entertain one more motion. Mayor Page? Okay, got a motion adjourned. All in favor say aye. So moved.
Good job, Billy.
Hey, you got your calves ready?
I've had some calves.
Me too, but it's been so muddy I can't get them up, and some of them getting pretty good size.
I got about, I sold a bunch last year.
Hey, man, it's good to see you. I will.
I'm like kind of uncomfortable. Funding opportunities.
Bigelow, Bigelow.
Good job, you, good job. Well,
With congratulations. For the help. Like that, I made sure it had several plugins on the other side, so other people besides me could use it.
All right, there we go.